John O'Leary, welcome to Clearwater Jazz Holiday's Young Lions Jazzmaster virtual sessions. The stage is all yours, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me, Steve. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here. So this course is about jazz harmony on the piano. So I'm really excited because as a pianist, one thing that we do a lot is play harmony. And so the first thing we can start is with what is harmony. And so if I play one note in itself doesn't have harmony. And eventually people were singing two notes at the same time. So when you have two notes at the same time, that's what we call harmony. So then in jazz, we have that a lot. Like, for example, an instrumentalist soloing and a bass player playing a bass line. That is a two voice counterpoint harmony. And so, for example, a melody with a bass line, that is counterpoint as well, you know? So in jazz, you have that kind of two-voice counterpoint. And in classical music, we're used to thinking of Bach. We're used to thinking of two-part inventions, and Bach is very much the counterpoint master. And so eventually they got to three voices at the same time. So what happens with three voices at the same time? You have one note, two notes, and a third note. When we play three notes, we usually have this thing called a triad. Here, I'm going to change my phone so that you can see on the piano. I can change the view here. All right. So this is a C triad, C, E, and G. C, E, and G. This is a major triad. And then we have a minor triad. And for you guys who are not musicians, one of the great ways to show this difference is by playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Now, if I play a minor version, it sounds very dark and very different. So that's the difference between major and minor. But even with just those three notes, we can also create another chord called a suspended chord. So instead of having C, E, and G, I can take this E note and move it to F. Normally, this E note is called the third. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the scale of C. So if I play 1, 4, 5, that's a suspension. If I play 1, 2, 5, that is also a suspension. And that's one example that they can be used in order to create musical ideas. Right. So harmony has a lot of tools that we can utilize to practice music and to create melodies. One of these things are inversions. So let's say I have this C triad, and I take this bottom note and I move it an octave higher over here to the top. So now we have here. This is called the first inversion. Now, the cool thing about first inversion is that it sounds like you're at home, but not really. It wants to go somewhere. Right? And then you can have second inversion, where I'm here, I was here, and then I take this one and put it on top here. So now I have G, C, and E. That also feels kind of at home. But you can, when you change it, it's got this really awesome quality, because you can make these deceptive things where it sounds like you're arriving home, but you're not really fully there until you have your actual root of your chord. So and so just with chords, with triads, major and minor triads and inversions, you can create all these different emotions. And these inversions help create different feelings and emotions. So, you know, like, so whenever I'm talking to students, I highly encourage them to explore inversions and different chords and how to move through them using different inversions of chords. Okay, so what happens after that? After we have the major triad, at some point we discover the dominant chord. What is the dominant chord? It's when you play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a flat 7. And that's what created voice leading. You have these two notes here. These two notes want to move inward. And that's what creates tonality as we know it. Whenever we are listening to a piece of music, we know where it's going because of this dominant chord. That too has inversions. Because there's 4 notes in this one, there's 4 inversions. Root, first, second, and third inversion. So as many notes as you have as many different inversions of a chord. So not only does this create voice leading, it also creates the harmony from which jazz is derived. So basically, we added an extra third on the top. So then if we do that to our major chord, you have a major 7 chord. Wow. But what if we did that to a minor chord? You have a minor 7 chord. And so that's how the jazz theory, jazz harmony is really an extension of classical harmony. Okay, so once we have these 4 notes, we derive all basic chords from jazz. You have from no flats, we're going to increase flats. We're here, we have a major 7, Then we have a dominant with a flat 7. Then we have a minor 7. Then we have a minor 7 flat 5, also called the half diminished. And then when we flat this 7 one more time, we have the fully diminished. And then, as we talked before about the sus chords, you also have sus chords. So those are the 6 basic buckets of chords. The first 5 are used much more than the sus chords in jazz, especially for the Great American Songbook. But as you get progressing in jazz, more different harmony is being utilized. All right, so these first 5 buckets tell you almost everything you need to know to learn a standard. Okay, so maybe we're here. Now, that was the melody. Those were the chords, but those chords don't sound very good, do they? It sounds like we're playing like rockabilly. And in jazz, it doesn't sound like that. You hear more sounds like this. But I'm playing the same 5 buckets or 6 buckets of chords. How do you get to the point where you can make a chord like this sound like this? And that's where voicing comes into play. And so when you have a chord, you have 12 notes to choose from, right? Because we have 12 notes in Western music. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Those are our 12 notes that we have to use. And so in Western music, you can use any of these notes in any chord, and it gives you a sound. And so the first thing I do is that I like to categorize these sounds if they sound good or bad to my ear right off the bat. So let's play my C major 7 chord, and I'll start with the first note. Okay, that's consonant. That's dissonant. That's consonant, dissonant, consonant, dissonant, consonant, consonant. That's dissonant, consonant, dissonant, consonant. So basically I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 notes that sounded very good, that I could play at any time with that chord and make a nice sound. And of those 7 notes, 4 of them are already in my chord. C major 7, we have C, E, G, and B natural, right? We built this off of the major scale, building a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The first 1, 3, 5, and 7 of the C major scale, which is all the white notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and again it repeats. So from here, I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 notes. That sounded good. 1 note is not in the scale, but it sounds really good. And of those 7 notes, 4 of them already in my chord. So I basically have the second, or if you play it an octave above your bass, it's called the 9th, or the sharp 4. And if you play it an octave above your bass, it's called the sharp 11. And the 6th, or if you play it an octave above the bass, it's called a 13. But you know, we can play every note on the piano and make it sound good with a chord. if we know how to work with those two tools that we were talking about, voice leading and inversions. How about, how can I add the D flat and the E flat to make it sound good? How about this chord right here? It doesn't sound super like crazy. Like I play way crazier chords than that, you know, versus. And you can resolve the tension inside of it. And that's what we mean by voice leading. Where are the voices going? What if I tried another chord that had the C sharp and also the E flat? Maybe. That has a C major 7, then a D major 7, and then an E major 7. And they're almost, they look like thirds stacked up on each other. But it sounds great to me. And it's a matter of how you move through the chords, how you voice them, and how the melodies for each one. You see, in the days of Bach, you had individual voices singing. They didn't have a piano like we know it today with these beautiful keys and sounds. They had some very primitive predecessor of it. They hadn't even agreed on which notes should be included in the Western repertoire of music. And so as the equal temperament of the 12 tones came about, people were still singing and creating music from it. So then, from there, when I'm trying to learn voicings, when I'm teaching voicings, I tell my students to start with the least amount as possible. So we can start with 2 notes. So this is 4 notes. Well, we have the bass. Let's say we're playing with the bass player, or we're the bass player. So that's 1 note. And then of the other 3 notes of major 7, of C major 7, which notes do we need to tell us that this is a major 7, right? We have E and B natural. We need those 2 notes to tell us. If we just have C and G, we don't know which one's B natural. We don't know if this is a C major chord, a C minor chord, a dominant 7. We have no idea what it is. So we need E and B to tell us what it is. So we start there. So we have C on the bass and E and B. Okay, excellent. So where do we go from there? So then we start with inversions. So we have 2 notes here, so we invert it here. Okay, so then we can practice this for all the keys. We can do it chromatically. And we can do it for the other voicing with the other inversion here. Okay, and then to practice voice leading, we use a tool called the circle of fifths. Do you guys know what the circle of, can you see this? Yes, the circle of fifths is when we take a note, let's say C, and then we put all the pitches in a circle in a fifths of each other. So we go C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that was C, G, D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, That's A, and we go all until we get through all 12 notes. So we have a circle. And so to practice voice leading between these chords, let's say we want to make these chords, a C major 7 chord and a G major 7 chord and a D major 7 chord and A major 7 chord. We'll take, we're here, and to get to G, we have to take the 3rd and the 7th. So we only have to move one note to get there. So we go C, G. Then from G to D major 7, only using the 3rd and the major 7, we need to move one note here. So we were here, C, G, D. Okay, and now from D to A, we just have to move one note. So we're inverting inversions. We start 7 on the bottom and 3 on top. Then we move to 3 on the bottom, 7 on top. Then 7, 3, 3, 7, and you're like inching by to get through each key. Right? And so on and so forth. And so that's going this way, clockwise. Well, we can also do that counterclockwise. We start with C major 7, and to get to F major 7, we only have to move one note. And from F major 7 to B flat major 7, we move this note. And so on and so forth. So that forces us to go through inversions to create a smooth transition from one chord and the other. And by voice leading, we literally mean what happens to each voice as they move. So we go la da la da la do la do, and to this voice la do la do ba do ba do. If I were just to repeat the same voicing for each one of this, the voice would be da da da, right? It would jump around. Oh, you would go here, you would go here, and then to the F sharp, and then to the D sharp, and then to the G sharp. Bo ba bo wa bo ba bo ba do dee dee ya. Whoops, that one was not right. So that's why we use inversions, to help stay in the same realm that we were before. And we can do that for every chord type. So we're talking about the next chord type would be dominant chords. We need, what are the 2 essential notes to tell us that a chord is a dominant chord? All right, we have the 3rd and the dominant 7. The 5th doesn't tell us if it's major or minor, doesn't tell us anything about the quality of the chord. Okay, so now we have 3rd, 7th root, and if we were to move this through the cycle here, let's go this way. We would do C7 to G7, to D7, to A7. And every time, what these voices do is that for this particular chord, the voices move chromatically. 3rd to 7, 7, 3, 3, 7, 7, 3, 3, 7, 7, 3. Otherwise, they jump around and they go ba, we, ba. And instead of doing that, we go la, di, o, wa, wa, wa. We treat it like a soprano voice and an alto voice with a defined range, or a tenor or a bass voice. Each one has a range, and you don't want to violate those ranges for them so that they can actually sing it. Now, you can do it the other way around. So now it's going to go down. You're going to F, B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, F sharp, B natural. Okay, and you can do that for all the chords. Every chord. Move it one way, move it clockwise in the circle of fifths, and move it counterclockwise in the circle of fifths. And that forces you to move through different inversions of the chords. All right. So then, jazz is based entirely on the circle of fifths, it seems like. We have clockwise and counterclockwise. When we go from G to C, that's called a perfect cadence. Right? You go. When you go clockwise from F to C, that's called a plagal cadence. Right? And in jazz, we always move in the perfect direction, it seems like. And we're always moving here. Let's say our goal is to end up at C. This is our goal to end here. And we can make this a 2 chord, and this is a 5 chord, and a 2 chord, and a 5 chord. So make it a minor 7 to a dominant 7, minor 7, dominant 7, minor 7, dominant 7, and then we get home. It would sound something like this. Whoops. And that sounds like 95% of jazz. And that's where it comes from. That's where, they chose that movement because it sounds good, because you're going from a 5 to a 1. And that movement is that perfect cadence that Bach pioneered that was so great. And so then, but what if we went the other way? What if we started moving this way? What would that do? So let's say we went from A flat to E flat to B flat to F to C. That sounds like the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So that's a lot. That could be like Keith Jarrett doing those things, but that's a perfectly acceptable way of moving through chords and getting to the one the same way that is this way. So when you're thinking about chord substitutions and thinking about how to go about to arriving at a point at a chord, you can't you don't have to think about the perfect side. You can also think about the plagal side of the circle of fifths and go in that direction. So that is something that I think is really cool and worth looking at. Okay, so now, how do we voice these chords? Okay, we have C major 7. We have our notes that sound consonant and our notes that sound dissonant. So most of the time we focus on the consonant notes because we want our chords to sound good. So we go C, we have our E and our B, and we go, okay, the first note was, all right, we already have that here. Either the bass player is playing that note or we're playing that note in the bottom. So we're not gonna play that again. We're gonna try not to double any notes. When you don't double notes, when you reduce how many notes you double, you increase the amount of spectrum you have. You have 12 notes to choose from. And if you play all 12 of them, you're getting the richest possible harmonic overtones that you can get. But when you're playing a lot of them, the same notes, it's not as harmonic. You don't get that feeling, that nice. If I played the same chord twice in a row versus two different chords, you get much more of the spectrum. So now we talked about having inversions, voice leading, and doubling. So we're going to try not to double notes. So we're here, and we're going to try our next consonant notes. How about here? That sounds nice. I like that. So we can do the same thing. Take that voicing. Now we have 3-note voicing. We're going to take that voicing and practice it through the circle of fifths. One way, do it the other way. Okay, let's try our next consonant notes. Okay, we have E, B, and E, but we're doubling E, so we're not going to play that. Okay, next one. Oh, that sounds very nice. I like that. So we can do the same thing. Take that voicing, practice it, and also what I didn't mention for the previous chord was to do the inversions. So I start with inverting the essential third and 7, and then figuring out where to place the extra note. Maybe here. If I'm arranging, maybe I'll put the extra note here. And I really like the sound of having a ninth, having to harmony with 2 notes and a chord, especially at the top and the bottom, because then you can do very cool lines in between. You sandwich the rest. And that started here just by having the harmony a ninth apart. Okay, so then now let's do our next one. So then we can do inversion. We can do it here. We can do it here. See what that sounds like. That's okay. This is so far apart that we're kind of losing some of that. So maybe it's better to have it here. Now, one thing I don't like to do is to have the extra notes below the essential notes. If I have the F sharp here, instead of here, then I have this. That doesn't sound like a major 7 chord with a sharp 11. That sounds like a dominant chord to me, like an A flat sharp 9 or a D7, D13. That would be a really out kind of a major. But if you're going for that sound, then you have that tool. So I always like to add all the essential stuff above the 3rd and the 7th. Okay, so then we have the 5th. That sounds great. We can do it here. We can do it there. This time it doesn't sound so bad when you have the 5th below, because it's part of the core of what a C major 7 is. So that doesn't bother me as much as the F sharp here. Okay, the next one, A. Yeah, that sounds good. I like that. We can put the E here. And now we have 4ths. This is a common chord in bossa nova. Okay, next. In our B, we are going to skip our B because you're already playing it. So basically, of those 7 notes, we only really need 1, 2, 3, 4 because we're already playing 3 of them. So only 4 of them we really use to create those sounds on top. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 for our 3-note voicings, right? Okay, but don't forget about the other ones. They're not popular because they don't sound good, but that doesn't mean that we can't utilize them. So how can we make these notes sound good? What can we do? We can move them around. So when you play the chord and release it, if a chord doesn't sound good, it's either not used correctly, like in the right context, or it's not voiced correctly in a way. What if I put it like this? What if I put that note here? It sounds less dissonant than it did here. Here it sounds less dissonant. Oh, if I add the sharp 11 to that, does that make it less dissonant?
Hey, John, we just lost your picture.
Whoops. How about now?
There we go. We got it back.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Excellent. Right. Or how about this one? How can we make that E flat sound good? You can make that E flat sound good by delaying resolution. So then if you decide that you're never going to use these notes because they sound quote unquote bad, then you limit yourself to how many colors you can create. Right. So, and how about this one? Wow, you can play it instead of the 5th. That sounds really cool. And that's a different way to use this note. Now this one's, so this is called the major 7 with a sharp 5 or a flat 6. That's a little bit more common than would be using a D flat or an E flat in a major 7 chord. But I think all the notes are worth exploring and trying to figure out how to make them fit. How about a B flat? So that's one thing, how to create chords to make them sound prettier or use the colors in a way that the farther apart the dissonants are, the less dissonant they sound. The closer they are together, the more dissonant they sound. You could almost play anything if they're that far apart. Sounds great to me. Just a C triad and an A triad. But if I play it here, it's not as pretty anymore. So that's another tool. Distance, how far apart you're putting the crunchy note to make them sound good. Okay, and same with the minor 7s, right? We have C minor 7. We have the essential notes here. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to move the other notes, go through other notes. And we can do that with all the different chords. So once we get to 4-note voicings, 3-note voicings, we start seeing more of the common patterns of jazz harmony. Because the circle of fifths is used so much, we use a lot of chords in this way. 2, 5, 1, D minor, G7 to C. And so the way that I like to voice these is by taking these essential notes and maybe one more note, the 9th, for example, and I'll play the D minor, D in my left hand. You can't see it. Here it is, like that. And then to get to a G7, I just have to move the C to a B natural. Now I have a G7 here with the 13 on the top. And then I move all these 3 notes one way down here to get a C 6-9. Right, so that's how I practice 2-5-1s. And get through all the keys that way. So that's one. Then I invert it. I go here. I put my 3rd, my 7, and my 3rd here. The D here. I'll use a 3rd note on top. I'll usually do the 5th, for example. To get to the G7, I just have to move this note to a B natural. And then to get to the 6-9 chord, an inversion of the 6-9, I just move this F here to the E. So. And then you can do that in all the different keys. So that those, if you have those 2 basic shells, then everything is at your reach. Because when you're talking about doing the upper extensions of a chord, like we were, let's say for the dominant chord, we want to play the flat 9 or the sharp 9 or the sharp 11 or the flat 13 for the G7 chord. Everything's right there. You have the flat 9, sharp, flat 9, sharp 9, sharp 11, flat 13, all right there. And then you use those as voice leadings. Da, 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 da. So then you have okay, great. So then that's why I always use these. Because they give you, it's for this, you have your sharp 9, flat 9, flat 13, sharp 11, all right there. So everything's kind of in this nice range, and you don't have to move a lot jumping. You can use your inversions to go from one voice from here, then I go back to the other one, top, second one, and so I'm moving through these structures, the first one, second one, and then everything else you need is there. Same with minor 2-5-1s. You have your for the three. I use the first one, and I like to use where the seventh is on the bottom. I like to use here. This inversion here, I only use when the melody allows for you to play the ninth. Most of the time, the ninth, sometimes the ninth sounds too hip and it takes away from the melody. So I'm playing a D minor, D half diminished, to a G flat 13, to a C minor 6. So I might do that, but most of the time I'll do here, root position, a dominant chord with a flat 13, and a minor 6 chord. When you use the minor 6 chord, you sound at home, just like when you use a major 7 chord. When you use the minor 7 chord, you don't sound at home the same. It's not like it sounds like it wants to go here. It sounds like a 2 chord. Until it gets to a major chord, then it sounds like you're at home. But so I like to use the 6/9 chord or a 6 chord when the key is minor. Okay, so then the next thing is the other inversion of that, where I have the 7th on the bottom. I love this. I just love the sound of it. And then to move to the 5 chord from a D half diminished to a G7, I just have to move this thumb over here. And then here's my minor 6 chord. I have the 3rd, the 5th, and the 6th. And I can add the 9. And again, same principles apply. You go from one inversion to the next. This inversion, second, then root position. All right, excellent. So then sus chords. I love sus chords. I feel like that's my to-go thing. Whenever I need to make a chord sound interesting, I just sus it. Like, makes it so much more rich. And so a basic sus chord is basically this. With the 5th, right? And then we add the minor 7th on top. That's a 7 sus 4. And you can add all the other extensions that we have, like a 9th, an 11, a 13. Voice it. When you voice it like that, it sounds like a minor chord on top of a different root. So you can play like a G minor 7 over a C, and that's your sus 9. Now I'm sorry, I misspoke with the 11th. The 11th is the sus chord. So you're just repeating the sus. The sus is basically taking the 3rd and moving it in one direction or the other. Not the minor 3rd, because that's a minor chord, but you're taking the 3rd and you're taking it into a non-chord tone, like an F or a D here. Right? And so then you can add the 9th and the 13th. It gives you that really cool kind of modern jazz sound that Herbie Hancock so beautifully played in so many of his records. And so the cool thing about sus chords is you can play flat 9s on that. We have a flat 9. It's like a G minor 7 flat 5, a G half diminished over C. So all my G half diminished licks I play over a C, C7 sus with flat 9. And again, the same principle that applies to all the chords apply to this one, which that every note is explorable. You just have to find a way to make it sound good. Can you play a major third and the sus together? Absolutely. And I thought that sounded kind of cool to play the flat 9 on a major chord. On F, I used F and C in the bottom, and A, D, and F sharp there. And it, you know, by using the 6 instead of the major 7, and because it's so far away from the root, it doesn't sound as dissonant. So another one that doesn't get explored very much is this using a 2 as a sus. You usually hear this or see this in pop music. Right? But in jazz, it would be very cool to have 1, 2, 5. How about the major 7? No major third. No major third there. You can add the major third on top if you want. And when you use this chord in parallel, I think it sounds super hip. You can take that thing and add a different bass note to it. Let's say we're here. What happens if this is like a G with a major 7? G2 sus with a major 7. And we add a C on the bass. Okay, let's add a D flat. That's kind of cool. And add a D. Now we have a D4 sus with a major 7. How about an E flat? In the right context, that could be a really cool crunchy chord. How about an E? I love that sound. It's like it's a minor chord essentially. With the 11th would be as a 4 right here in the middle. Okay, and you can do that for all the notes. Oh, that's cool. Here you're doubling the top note and the bottom. We talked about not doubling notes, except when you play them like as a block chord. It sounds beautiful. And then you can drop this an octave. And it creates a really cool tension for like writing, you know, music and arranging things in a different way. So just to recap really, really quickly, the most important tools that I think we have in harmony are, one, using inversions to create different colors and different emotions and textures. A second one is to think about voice leading. where each note is going and where it's coming from. So it starts here, the voice moves this way, and then it goes there. And if you can map out where each note was going to and from as an individual singer, you're really thinking about voice leading. Okay, the third one was about thinking about all the notes that we decide to play and we decide not to play. When we just play the notes that sound pretty, that are already consonant, we create very stock sounds that anybody can come and play. And we want to create our sound and what we like and we find interesting. And by exploring notes that wouldn't necessarily sound right and finding a way to fit them in there, you start creating all these different possibilities for palette, for texture. And thinking about the circle of fifths and how chords move in one direction towards the circle of fifths, or the perfect side, and then thinking about the plagal side. I could sit here and talk about so many more cool things in harmony. There's so much. I love this stuff. And so I thank you guys so much for staying with me for over an hour. You guys are troopers and you're the best. If you guys have any questions about any of this material, feel free to reach out to me on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. I'm on everything. I can also give you my email. And I love to talk about this stuff and would be happy to clarify anything. So thank you again for being here with me. And I hope to see you next week on the 16th for Develop a Language for Improvisation. Thank you guys. Have a great day.